Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Crosswinds Church More Than Sunday podcast. I'm Chris. I'm the senior pastor here at Crosswinds, and we're doing this podcast really as a way to stay connected as we're all in the middle of this restriction from large gatherings in person, or really any gatherings, at least right now. We thought it might be a way for you to stay engaged and hear from your pastors and other people around Crosswinds. And today, I'm going to be talking with Jodie Tey, our Associate Pastor, about something that we mentioned on Sunday in our sermon, something we're calling the Creekside Center for Spiritual Formation. We're so excited about this. Cannot wait for you to hear it. Enjoy this. Hey everyone, I'm here with Jodie Tey, our Associate Pastor. And really, Jodie, you are also the director of the Creekside Center for Spiritual Formation, right?
Yes, I am the director of Creekside Center.
Kind of as we get this thing off the ground?
Yeah, it's scary to say that. Exciting and scary to say that at the same time.
Welcome back to the podcast, Jodie.
Thank you. Thank you.
So on Sunday, I mentioned that there were a number of things we were going to be doing as part of our trying to regather as a church. And one of those things I mentioned was some classes we'll be holding on Sundays. When we got to that part, I said, when you start to hear more about these classes as they come online, you're going to hear that they're coming from Crosswinds, but also from this thing called the Creekside Center, Creekside Center for Spiritual Formation. And I said, we're going to do some podcasts to talk more about that because we've had a vision for that for a few years that we were already going to start to talk about right around now anyway. And this is the first of what we think is going to be like 3 podcasts where we kind of explain a little bit of this thing, right?
Right.
Yeah. So we're going to dive in a little bit, sharing some of our own experience that led to this thing. But Jodie, before we even dive into that, what is it about something like a Center for Spiritual Formation that to you makes that a compelling thing you'd want to give your life to? I mean, why is that a thing?
Well, I think for me, it's been kind of welling up in me. Chris and I, you know that you and I have been talking about this for not just a couple years. It's been like 5 or 6 years now that we've been talking about there kind of being like this void of a void in 2 different ways. One, a void of practices of things that we can be engaging in our spiritual journey that kind of center us and connect us to God in a way that, maybe coming to church doesn't do, or a small group doesn't do, carving out sacred space to just connect with God, that we have lacked maybe some of those practices and recovering some of those practices in our lives. Okay, so there's that one void that we have.
Yeah.
And then the other void that came with that, alongside that, was recognizing that there was nothing in the East Bay. Like, there are centers for spiritual formation, but they're in Santa Rosa. They're on the peninsula. They're on the other side of the bridge, so to speak, but there was nothing in the East Bay where people could tap into resources that were local and close to them.
Yeah.
And so you and I started talking years ago about what it would be for us to start birthing and thinking about something like this, because I know it has meant a lot to both you and I as we have experienced it over the last couple of years.
Yeah, so I think what would be, I think everything's always more compelling in story. So maybe let Jodie and I just kind of share our story a little bit of our experience with this kind of thing, right? Jodie and I both have grown up in church. We both actually grew up in Southern Baptist churches.
Yep.
Where some of what we're going to talk about, never even heard of it. Would you agree?
Oh yeah,
never
nothing.
even heard of some of the concepts we're going to talk about on these 3 podcasts.
Oh no, not at all. I think if we would have heard it in a Baptist church, we would have thought it was something very mystical, right? We would have shied away from it.
And in addition to that, even being at Crosswinds, where I think we're certainly more open-minded to some things like this, there was just very little in place at Crosswinds to invite people into some of what we're going to talk about. A lot of what our church has been about has been kind of the large group service, which, I certainly hope it's an interactive, collaborative experience, but it certainly can come off performance-oriented, like I'm watching someone speak, I'm watching someone sing, there's less of me engaged always in the way that I'd hope. I don't think that's entirely true, but the nature of putting
Sure.
hundreds of people in a room, that's part of what happens. And then we do small group, which is a really great thing. But as far as you having a personal solo time with God, which is so much of what formation is centered around, that's not been really part of Crosswind's discipleship process, for lack of a better word. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think even as I was growing up, everything was centered in, your quiet time with God, and that consisted of reading your daily Bible verse. It was a lot more to a lot of people, but
that's
it
where
was
the
like
one-on-one piece with God
that was
is
the
coming.
only one-on-one piece really that I learned about growing up. Not that it was insignificant, because it was at the time, but now I think we know that there's much more to that, much more to what that can be in your spiritual life. It can be much more than 5 minutes reading a Bible passage.
Yeah. So the story goes that about 4 years ago now, maybe 4.5, 5 years ago, I had a friend named Bobby from Santa Cruz who said to me, "Hey, Chris, I did this incredible thing last year with a bunch of other pastors up in like the hills of Woodside called Soul Care. And it is this team of people primarily led out by these two women who have a center for formation called Wellspring out of the city of Menlo Park. And they invite like senior pastors from around the Bay Area to come, and over the course of about 9 months, meet once a month and really just develop their own inner spiritual life. And I said, "Well, Bobby, tell me a little bit more." And he's like, "Yeah, you're up in the mountains. You spend a lot of alone time with God. You do a lot of Ignatian prayer exercises." And pretty much by the time he got to that, I'm like, "I'm out. No way. Not from me." I tell this story that at one point in my 20s, I went up to a monastery. Have I told you this before, Jodie?
Yes,
I think I have.
I love it. It's a great story.
I went up to a monastery, and I thought, this is in like the Santa Barbara Mountains. I think it's burned down now in like some kind of fire that happened up there years and years ago. But this is probably 20 years ago. I went up there, maybe even more. So like right before Andrew and I got married. I went up there and thought, I want to spend like 3 days, and this is going to be great. Just me and God. I'll read, I'll like write. This will be perfect. I got there. You're not allowed to talk to anyone. It was like a silent monastery. You're sitting at tables like breakfast and lunch and dinner tables with monks who don't speak. You get put in your room, like lights out is like 7 p.m. It's dark. I think I went in the winter. It was dark. There's no television. Of course, it's a monastery.
Oh my gosh. Sounds like torture.
There's nothing to do when I read every book. It was torture. I read every book I could read. And by the time I was done, it was only like midnight, and I had no idea how I was going to get out of there. Anyway, I ended up leaving the monastery one day into my 3 days. But I was worried that this is what soul care was going to be.
Yep.
And so I ended up talking to Bobby and said, "There's no way I want to do that. I don't want to go up into the mountains and hang out with a bunch of pastors and then just go kind of have alone time." And he said, No. It's not quite like that. It's going to be a great group of people you really enjoy spending time with. It's going to be a lot of wonderful food. There's going to be a lot of wine.
Oh,
and I think
so
that
much
you would
wine.
stand by that, Jodie.
So much wine. It was an impressive amount of wine.
So much wine.
And I'm Italian, so to impress us with your wine is a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And it's going to be a completely different experience. And so I said, all right, I'll kind of go check this out. And I went and talked with the people who run this and had a chance to get to know them. And as I spoke with them, what hit me very quickly was that as a pastor, while I have spent a lot of years investing in our church and other people's spiritual lives, there's not really been anyone who's invested in mine.
Right.
At the same time, I told them, what I really long for is someone to do that. But I also know that you throw me in the woods for 2 hours and just ask me to go, it's going to be bad. Like I'll be on my phone, or I'll find ways to distract my mind. I'll be thinking about work and things I've got to get done. And they said, we create something that is so engaging. We don't think that that's going to be a problem. And so it's a long story, a little bit shorter because it's already been long. Went up and had an incredible experience that I was absolutely able to do, that was accessible, that taught me these Ignatian prayer exercises that were like things I had never really learned before, and taught me to do them in a way that I did not find myself going crazy in the middle of all of it.
Right.
It was unbelievable.
Completely.
I remember the first day, second day, they put some chairs. Did they do the chairs exercise with you? They put some chairs out on like in the middle of the floor.
Oh yeah, and you
they
had
said,
to.
these are the chairs, and you've got to figure out, like, get up in front of us and just kind of show us where you and God are in these chairs. And in our large group of 25 pastors from all over Northern California, some people, put the chairs stacked on each other. Some people turned the chairs over on their sides. Everybody had different metaphors. And then you explained why, your chair was that way. And as they did that, I did not know how to put my chair. If I recall correctly, I remember thinking, I don't even know what soul care turned into for me over the course of 9 months was a very long experience to figure out where my chairs have been and should be with God. And I think that is to some degree what we're hoping Creekside can be for people as well. Now, what happened after my experience, I was like, I know that this is primarily for senior pastors. Would you be open to like Andrea going to this? Would you be open to Jodie going to this? They said yes. Andrea went the following year. Jodie, you were part of the they don't ever want people from the same church being a part of it, right? That's kind of the deal at the same time, because it kind of ruins it. You're supposed to be up there not having to worry about what people think about what you say and whatever else. Jodie, you went the third year.
Yes, I did.
I think Derek has gone this last year, right?
Yep.
So he's the fourth Crosswinds person to go, and we'll see what happens as we move forward. But Jodie, share with us a little bit about what your experience was like with that whole thing.
So I remember that exercise we had to do with the chairs and having to figure out where I was going to put that chair. And I remember just the shock. It just hit me like a ton of bricks because I thought I put the chair out the door. I walked it all the way outside. I put it on the patio, and then I sat in the middle of this room with all these people and said, it was hard to admit that as a pastor that I felt that God was that far away.
Yeah.
And I almost felt like I had like an imposter syndrome. Like here I am as a pastor, and I have to admit to this room of leaders that God feels that far, and I feel that disconnected as a spiritual leader. And so I think the year for me was figuring out how to get my chair closer. And honestly, it had nothing to do with me doing anything with performance or work, but it was allowing God to scoot his chair closer to mine. And I had to learn how to allow that to happen. And I am telling you, it has totally changed my relationship with God, because there are things that we can do, kind of structured things, like Chris, like you were just talking about, realizing that you didn't have to sit in a monastery for a day. I remember in seminary, we were told to go on a silent retreat, and it was agony. I went to the beach and I sat there for about 10 minutes and I said, this is crap. I mean, there's no way other than enjoying this ocean that this is drawing me to God. But there are practices, there are structures, there are things that you can do in that time that allow God to draw his chair closer to you. And it's not about you working toward it. It's about putting yourself in a space where you can hear and listen and see in a totally different way. So that's what the year was for me.
Yeah, it's good. I think sometimes if you're listening to this, you got to go, well, what did the structure of one of those things even look like? And I think it might be worth just walking somebody through a normal 5-hour event so that you can kind of get a picture of why it wasn't so intimidating, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
like, correct me if I'm wrong as I try to walk through this in
Okay.
2 minutes. Like,
All right.
you get there, the first half hour, you're just eating hors d'oeuvres and mingling and catching up with your friends that you hadn't seen since last month, right?
Right. And it's
Stuff
really
along those lines.
good food. It's not just chips. Like
It's really
they
good food.
would cater everything. And so you'd
Yeah.
walk into like a buffet of appetizers.
Yes. The second, as soon as it kind of really started to get going, it would be sitting there in comfortable. Well, our setting was really, really comfortable. We were in a different setting, I think, than you guys ultimately when you went. But it's sitting there and a little bit of a teaching time, somebody kind of explaining a little bit of what it is, like a thought about God. It wasn't a teaching time on Ignatian. It wasn't, or it wasn't. It wasn't a time talking through what an Ignatian practice looks like. I should say, it's Ignatius, not Ignatian.
Whatever his name is.
You know what I'm saying. This was a time where we would just say, today we're going to talk about the love of God and what that looks like in your life. And there'd maybe be somebody talking for 20 minutes about that. Then maybe somebody else would get up and just say, hey, there's this really important poem I want to read that's related to that. And then they might say, so here's what we want you to do. Here are some worksheets. And we're going to just send you out into the park nearby or the grounds of the place we are to just go sit and kind of write your thoughts about this and even answer some questions. Am I getting that right? That's about what it
Yeah,
looked
and
like?
I think, even in the teaching segment, I know you're like, what's so great about, listening to somebody talk for 10 minutes and teach, but the way it was crafted, and this is where Crosswinds, you're kind of used to this and how we do things is you're almost drawn into like some kind of spiritual conflict, I guess, or recognizing that there was a need somewhere, something that you needed to explore with God. And by the time you're done listening to that teaching, I couldn't wait, like, set me free. Give me the question, give me the things that I need to do because I need to explore this. There was a hunger for it. Yeah. And so I think that's what makes this unique is that the experience taps into a spiritual hunger that maybe you never even knew that you had.
So you may then go sit down for 45 minutes and write, journal. You may go for a walk and just pray while you're walking, whatever the case may be. And then you come back and you might go to small group. So everybody would be in kind of a small group that would stay the same each thing. But here's the difference between those small groups and like what we do in small group. In those small groups, you're not allowed to give each other advice or do like what's called crosstalk where you're really the facilitator is there to just kind of get everybody a share. And all you can do is basically look at the people across from you and go, that resonates with me. I can relate to that.
Or just hold it. The language became, I'm going to hold that with you.
I'm going to hold that.
I'm going to hold that with you. Just you couldn't respond. And I'll tell you, just as a leader, as a pastor, the freedom that came with just to listen, to hear somebody and not have to answer it, respond to it, provide some kind of spiritual insight to it was so freeing because it allows you the time and space to tap into what that person is experiencing and it brings something up for you. So
absolutely,
it was awesome.
You sense God working in the middle of all of that. So far, here's what we've got. We're about 2.5 hours into this event, and 45 minutes is just me alone in silence, right? And even that is probably on a walk or whatever. It's listening to someone. It's listening in group. It might be sharing. It might be, and then it's me going and doing some of that alone. Okay, so after the group part, we might break for another moment for us to go and have another 30 minutes to reflect on what happened in group and journal about that or take another walk. Then we might come back and all have dinner together, an extravagant dinner with wine. And then,
so good.
So we might have an hour of that. And then after dinner, where you're hanging out with people and catching up and getting to know people, after that, we'd have a moment where there was usually some sort of more practical, tangible take home, like a thing that I was going to go do or leave with or whatever. I don't want to list any of them because I don't want to give anything away if you end up doing any of it or anyone who listens to this ends up doing soul care somehow. But it's to say really, really great stuff that made it a very palatable experience. And before you know it, at the end of that, you're like, holy cow, I just learned an Ignatian prayer exercise that I didn't know that's what I was doing.
Right. And the whole retreat itself was not a one-off experience, really. It carries through until the next time you
Yes.
meet.
Yes.
It is things, questions and things that you process daily, and they keep building on each other. And the
Yes.
beautiful thing about it is that all of these things that you're processing, this need or whatever that God has put on your heart to process with him, these are the things that you get to talk about, like with a spiritual director, which we'll talk about later, but you go even deeper. You go even deeper into these things.
So let's hang in that. That's a really important thing. All I've described so far is just the once a month retreat. The truth is, you've been given materials now to take and work with for the next 30 days until you get together again. And Jodie, you just mentioned one of the crucial pieces, which is at some point in those next 30 days, you meet with what is called a spiritual director, who in this case happened to also be your small group leader. We're going to do a whole episode on spiritual direction and what that is. But the long and short of it, Jodie, I mean, if you had to sum that up in like 30 seconds, what a spiritual director is, could you do that at all?
Yeah, I would say, and it's kind of tongue in cheek, but it ends up being this, is that it's like couples counseling between you and God. You've got this thing that you're exploring with God. Maybe it's an issue, maybe it's a problem, maybe there's a blockage somewhere in your connection, and you're bringing all of this into your meeting with your spiritual director. And a very skilled spiritual director is going to help you kind of, through asking questions, not telling you. This is all about you discovering this as your own, as they ask very discerning questions, kind of peeling back these layers of things that you're wrestling with so that you can actually see God in the midst of it, and that connection is kind of restored. It's unbelievable how it happens when you're sitting with someone who does this really well. It's unreal.
Exactly. So the retreats are just the catalysts for further conversation with you and God. And then this person is almost like a therapist or coach, not a therapist for your marriage or your own personal whatever, for you and God, as you're going through this journey together until the next thing 30 days later. Well, all of this leading to Creekside is I go through this and I'm getting done with it, and I'm talking to Jodie saying, Jodie, you got to go to this. And I think maybe God has something for you in this that is more than just you going through it, although you ought to just go through it before you even think about anything else. But I wonder if he doesn't have something for you in leading out something like this for people who are not just pastors, right?
Right. I think that, well, I remember going into it, before the first session, you and I had a conversation, and you're like, hey, don't think about work in the midst of this. Just don't. This is just but for you and God. And I appreciated that. But I tell you,
pulled you aside on the bridge.
you did. He did.
It was the day of, or the day before.
I got a talking to.
Before you go. Because here's what I found. A lot of pastors go to this thing and they're like, hey, I'm here for the next 9 months to figure out what I'm supposed to do with my life. Or to figure out, like, and I'm like, that's cool. I get it. But the greatest gift is just figuring out you and God and not having to solve a bunch of other things.
Yeah. And I told you, I said that was the greatest gift that you gave me. Like going into it was not to have to figure it out for Crosswinds or for our area or whatever. But I'm telling you, like 2 months in, I'm like, oh, I think I got to I've figured this out for like it was so impactful. And I really tried to kind of like reel that back and keep it about me and God. But the more it was about me and God, the more it built in me that was like, if this is this impactful, has been impactful for you and Andrea, and I know what I'm experiencing, how can we not bring this to our church and to our area, to whoever wants it, whoever needs it. So
as we talk about Creekside Center, the idea is not to do a thing for pastors who are, that might be a part of this at some point, but I think the real idea is, how do we take some of these exercises we've learned, some of these retreat experiences we've been a part of, spiritual direction, any one of those three and more, right? Some of these classes, the Enneagram things we've done the last couple of years around Crosswinds. The Advent retreat, which was actually led this year by these two women I was telling you about from Wellspring. I say led this year. This is their retreat. We just were lucky enough to get to host it.
We hosted
and
it.
Hopefully we can keep hosting it forever as far as we're concerned. We'd love to. We're supposed to do an Easter one, and didn't work out, obviously, with the shelter in place. But I think our hope is to try to bring that. And Jodie, as we try to kind of start to turn a corner to wrap it up,
Right.
Why is that important right now in our world?
Oh my
And
gosh.
for people in the East Bay, church people, unchurched people, why does something like this matter?
Well, I think even before shelter in place and just everything that's happening in our world right now, I would have said there's been no greater time for us to tap into where God is in the midst of everything. And I look at where we're at right now in our time in history. It is so hard to see where God might be working. It's hard to find him, discover him, see him, hear him. And so I think that it matters greatly because I think that there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of busyness. There's a lot of ways we've been taught to connect with God.
Yeah.
But I think that it's so much to what soul care is and what Creekside can be in terms of quieting that stuff down and really figuring out for ourselves how to put practices in place that it's really about creating sacred space for you to connect with God. I think that's what Creekside is creating sacred space and holding sacred space for people
Yeah.
to connect, because we don't know how to do that on our own. Sometimes we need help doing that.
One of the things we've talked about, Crosswinds has always been a church that really has had a heart to reach out to people who don't know Jesus, who are unchurched, don't have that experience. And I think there's another facet to Creekside, which is that there are people who may never set foot on a Sunday morning into our service because they have some I hate to use the word baggage, but baggage about
Oh,
what church
yes.
is,
Yeah.
their experience of it in the past or what they've seen in other people's lives. And yet they would say they're very spiritual. And they'd love guidance and direction for what it looks like to do this kind of, as you put it, counseling with God. And as I say that, I mean Jesus. And this has not been available to them in the traditional church. And so one of the reasons we would say, hey, let's not just make this a department in our church, a
Right.
spiritual formation department, but a larger thing on its own is because we want to overcome those obstacles to help people really connect to God on this level. And I think that's another reason we're excited to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so not just for the person who may not go to church, but for the person who's maybe been in church their whole life
Yeah.
and is going, hey, there needs to be, not that church doesn't meet a need, because it does, but there's got to be something more, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be, I need some tools. I need to know what the more is. I need to experience the more with God.
Yeah.
So for that person too.
So what's going to start to happen is you're going to start to see us promoting those things as they come online. And again, in the next couple of podcasts that we do together, you'll hear a formal one that's about spiritual direction, what that's all about. I think we've got one we're going to do on what is the other one we were hoping to talk through?
We were talking about retreats, what retreats are like, and
yes,
yeah.
we should walk people through those a little bit in
Right.
our context.
Right.
As we do all of that, you're also going to just start to notice over time more and more stuff coming from Creekside. Man, that is something you certainly register to go to yourself. It's something that you can invite friends to, especially friends who, for whatever reason, you might not be able to invite to Crosswinds.
Right.
I'd say this, our vision for it is way bigger than just Crosswinds too. It's just the entire East Bay. We
Right.
just want to resource people and help people with this in ways that maybe local churches aren't able to do as much. I'll say that we're really grateful that we had some people outside of our church that were able to put this together for people like ourselves. And this never would have happened organically in Crosswinds outside of somebody else's intervention. And maybe this can be that for some others. So we invite you to participate in this as we go. And yeah.
Yeah, and I would say too, like the word that comes to my mind is just trust us. Trust us with the experiment, where as we start to roll things out, just give it a shot. I know that maybe some of you that are listening, you're listening going, yeah, that sounds great for you, but I still don't think that would be for me. I'm just telling you, try it. Just try it a couple times. Bring someone with you, like Chris said, but just trust us that this is good.
Yeah.
It's good.
All right. Thanks, Jodie. Excited to talk more of the other podcasts and let people hear some of this.